It is, right? Okay. So thank you so much. So just to introduce myself very quickly, my name is Rania De Vito. I'm with the Third World Network, and it's a pleasure to be here again. I think the last briefing we had, it's been maybe 3 months, and since we last met, the Intergovernmental Working Group has met a few times through informal and formal meetings, and at first the IGWIC had to define the structure of the negotiations of the PABS Annex, and also the country submissions and other modalities to go forward with the negotiations. Then it came in contact with resource persons, and we have info service on that I will share on the chat very briefly. And the next section, which is the third Intergovernmental Working Group or IGWIG meeting, is going to be hosted between the 3rd and the 7th of November. So next week, just next week, and will be the first actual tax-based negotiations. And on that front, we have a dangerous proposal submitted by the European Union, a submission by the IGWIG Bureau as well for a text, and those of developing countries. But these are just some highlights. And to explain this in depth and break down the terms in dispute and what they mean and their implications, we have here today as speakers Gopa Kumar and Nifin Ramakrishnan, who are senior researchers with TWN and have been monitoring the negotiations and been also on the ground in Geneva. So without further ado, I would give the floor to Gopa. Thank you so much. And please, just as a last message, feel free to raise your hands or write any comments or questions on the chat or in the Q&A. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rania, and thank you for everyone for accepting our invite. As Rania mentioned, the idea is to take and brief, a couple of slides to provide the background, and then to flag certain concerns, and then my colleague Nitin will take you into much more details of some of the concerns flagged here. So Rania, please do help me to play the slides. Yeah, thanks. We can just move to the next slide. And as most of you aware that today's presentation is titled as the centrality of equity. So as a background, we should all keep in mind that there is only one article in the entire pandemic agreement which guarantees access to vaccines, treatment, and diagnostics to developing countries is Article 12 under the PABS system. There is no other article provides any legal guarantee or any legal predictability that in case of a next pandemic, countries who are having these products are under a legal obligation to provide these relevant health products to developing countries or to WHO. So this is the only article. So that's the context. So that is why we named it as the centrality of equity in the PABS system. So the PABS system is the only hope as of now. So now we'll just look at the whole global gap in production and supply or the consumption of health products existing. I'm just putting the example of vaccine. So similar case applies or similar situation exists with the pharmaceutical products also. When it comes to vaccine, there is a high concentration. Just 10 manufacturers control 73% of the volumes and capturing around 80%, 85% of the value. Though the largest producer of vaccine is in India, but in terms of value, it is a very, very low percentage. just the companies belong to International Federation of Pharmaceutical Marketing, Manufacturing Association, which controls approximately 85% of the financial value. And much of it is extracted from the high-income countries. So this has implication, and this gives a very clear picture that who controls the vaccine market. But when it comes to the vaccine development, developing countries does play a role. Next slide, please. So here it shows that many of the vaccine products developed from materials and sequenced from the developing countries or the global south. So here is the case of Ebola vaccine and Ebola related monoclonal antibody. So this is from a report from the MSF, which clearly shows that the EVD products are a telling example of why the current global health architecture needs to be challenged and improved in order to ensure access to medicines to those who need it. So these medicines are developed using the samples obtained from the global south, but when there was outbreak came, there is not enough access. This is not the one case. Next slide, please. So this again shows another example where the Nipah virus vaccine, which has the samples are obtained from Malaysia, Bangladesh, and India, but there is no real sharing of benefit in terms of vaccine doses or even the technologies or even improved cell lines. Next slide, please. So that shows there is a global concentration, but at the same time, the samples are always going from the developing countries. But when it comes to outbreaks, global south is at the mercy of some of these countries. So this is a recent example where last year Switzerland and Canada refused to share or part of their stockpiles on Mpox vaccines. So this kind of situation needs to be avoided. So that's the one of the primary objectives of the pandemic agreement as well as the international health regulations. So this is the context of a PABS regime. So we need to keep these realities in our mind when we look at the text. Next slide, please. We are not talking about a entirely new system when we talk about PAP system. There is something existing, but that is limited only to the pandemic of influenza-related pandemic, not all other pandemic. Okay, so there is a framework which clearly mandates the pharmaceutical companies to share benefit in terms of providing predictable access from their doses to WHO, then WHO can supply other countries. Next slide, please. Yeah, here is a video about the very brief video on the PIP system. That saves my time to explain, and this, explain it very nicely. What is a PIP system?
Viruses respect no borders. A simple could be the start of the next global influenza pandemic. We all have a role to play in preparing for the next pandemic so that all countries can protect their people. As part of this effort, WHO coordinates a network of specialized public health laboratories that work together to study influenza viruses, assess their threat level, and develop critical materials and information. Industry uses these to make life-saving vaccines, antivirals, and other products needed during a pandemic. Under WHO's Pandemic Influenza Preparedness Framework, or PIP framework, manufacturers that receive these materials must share some of the products they make with WHO, so that when the next pandemic strikes, WHO can supply them to countries that would not otherwise get them. The Standard Material Transfer Agreement 2, or SMTA-2, is a contract WHO signs with each manufacturer to memorialize its commitments, ensuring WHO has ready and predictable access to specific life-saving products when the next pandemic starts. WHO works closely with each manufacturer to reach a fair and reasonable agreement. Whether it's donating a percentage of vaccine, reserving antivirals and diagnostic kits at affordable pricing, or licensing technology to those who need it. Through negotiations, WHO will work with each manufacturer to ensure they understand everything required of them, including regulatory matters, pre-qualification, and labeling and packaging. This way, when the next pandemic starts, WHO will quickly connect with its manufacturing partners, who will already know exactly what WHO expects. The result? Quicker global response times, equity of access to life-saving vaccines, and, most importantly, greater solidarity among nations. After all, in a public health emergency like pandemic influenza, we're all in this together. For more information, visit who.int/influenza/PIP.
The next slide, please, Sanya. So it's very clear there is a mechanism already existing, but that mechanism is only limited to influenza related pandemic. That is why there was not enough response from WHO in terms of facilitating access, because there was no WHO though created those mechanisms with Gavi, but they were not getting the vaccines at the right time. But had it been an influenza pandemic, there would have been a much more legally binding obligations around the pharmaceutical companies to share the doses. Then the response would have been much more better. So the PIP framework has the following elements, which has the first part is the agreement, which spell out the response, what is a material content of the PIP framework, that is how to provide access to samples, and what are the institutional mechanism involved in the whole working of the PIP element, and the benefit sharing details, as well as the governance mechanisms, including the advisory board. And then it also contains 5 annexes: the standard material transfer agreement 1, which is basically deals with the governs the transfer of materials to the lab. Basically the WHO network of laboratories, and the standard material transfer agreement 2, which is any kind of transfer from the laboratory to an outside or to a third person is governed through the SMTA-2. SMTA-2 is basically the agreement governs the access and benefit sharing with the pharmaceutical companies or other product developers. Then we do have an advisory group's terms of reference, and the whole network, the global influenza surveillance and response net systems terms of reference. And we also have terms of reference to pandemic influenza preparedness, biological material, how to handle those things. So we do have a very comprehensive system is working right now. And ideally, it should be replicated, and the idea is to replicate. And whoever reads the text, we will find clearly that the mandate is that without creating duplication of the PIP system. So in a way, ideally, the task of a PABS system is should be heavily drawn from what is there in the PIP system, and then to customize it for the PABS, for the other pandemic. Okay, so here the scope of a PABS system is much bigger than the PIP, but most of the institutional mechanisms and the structure or the architecture can be borrowed easily. So basically, I'm saying is that you don't have to invent the wheel fully. There are elements already there. Next slide, please. So now we do have a text release, draft text. That draft text contains basically 3 parts, and the first part deals with the scopes and objectives, then certain use of terms, and the crucial part is actually part 2, which has 3 parts, subparts. One is the operation of the PABS system, then the provisions related to access of PAB material, and the third part is the benefit sharing details. And the third section of the text deals with governance as well as review. So this is sort of the structure. So next slide, please. So now the question, why do we all these demands, is it a charity or not? The question is that it is not a charity because the Convention on Biodiversity recognizes the permanent sovereignty over genetic resources, okay, which is then further developed and with the details under the Nagoya Protocol on Access and Benefit Sharing. So under the both the CBD and Nagoya Protocol, it's very clear, every country has the freedom to regulate the movement of genetic resources. So every country can regulate by demanding certain benefits emerging out of the research. Then only they are supposed, they can share that biological material. So if you are a party to Nagoya, you are basically under an obligation actually to provide the access only if there is a benefit sharing, if there is a shared understanding on with regard to or consensus reached on benefit sharing emerging out of that genetic resources research and development. So the PIP framework, if every country insists different conditions, there will be a inefficient system, and PIP framework basically is creating a carving out. Even the PABS also aims to do that, to create an international system so the sharing can happen very easily. Otherwise, the companies have to go to each country and obtain it. Okay, this may take delay, and in a pandemic situation or even for the public health emergency of international concern, if there is so much difficulty in accessing the samples, then the whole product development get delayed, the response get delayed. So this the mechanism is created basically to smoothen that process. The access can be easy, so you can have a your product at the earliest. So now the target is that to create a vaccine within 100 days from the date of sharing of the vaccine. So this mechanism is basically then asking countries to shed their sovereignty over genetic resources or to create a mechanism to smoothen the access other than their own respective national biodiversity laws and regulations. So therefore, the demanding access from the pharmaceutical companies is not a charity. It is an obligation on them. But now, instead of each country asking these vaccine dosages or the benefit, it will be, WHO will be entrusted as a custodian. So therefore, these medicines can come, and then WHO as a global or international coordination agency on international health can distribute. So this is the rationale. So there is there is nothing called charity here, but it is in legal entitlements we are talking about. Next slide, please. So that is why Article 12 of the agreement, if you see, the whole PABS system is established under Article 12, and Article 12 very clearly says that sovereign right of states, recognizing sovereign state of the state, that is mentioned very clearly. And further, other word is that access is conditioned upon. So one of the conditions for access is the obligation on the parties who seeking access to share the benefit. That is why it is written here on an equal footing, right? Rapid and timely sharing of material sequences, information on pathogens with the pandemic potential, and on an equal footing, the rapid, timely, and fair and equitable sharing. So both should be on an equal footing. How do you implement an equal footing? When you implement an equal footing, that you put a condition that with the moment you access, you are also undertaking an obligation to share the benefit. Then it goes and it establishes the PABS system based on this these key principle of equal footing. Next slide, please. So this is the context of context of the PABS instrument. Now let us look at the what are the concerns emerging out of the proposed text. The proposed text, we should also keep in mind that when you read different elements of the text, the bureau which is responsible for drafting this text clearly mentioned that these elements needs to be further developed. But it does provide a skeleton of or the structure of the PABS system. So now if you look at the most important concern is the decoupling of benefit sharing from access. Now, if anybody reads the text, it's very clear. You are accessing the product, then off late, you may have to undertake an obligation to share the benefit. But whether you have to sign an agreement, you get an impression that. But whether you have to really sign, is it legally mandatory to enter into a legal, to undertake a legal obligation for benefit sharing? It's not very clear from the language. So I'm just quoting the paragraph dealing with the chapeau of, it's not a chapeau, it's a paragraph 1 of the section C, and it's very clear. It says that all parties in the PABS system shall receive notice of possible legally binding benefit sharing arrangement. You get a notice. It is not that the moment you access it, you will sign it and get it, okay, or you will click wrap and get it. It's not very clear. It says that you will get only a notice. So this is basically clearly conveys the message that you access first and off late you may sign a benefit sharing agreement. This is highly a problematic approach. And against the PIP provision, the contrast is very clear. So the PIP, for instance, clearly states that the Director General will, using the standard material transfer agreement in Annex 2, enter into agreements with entities outside the WHO GISRIS. Such agreement will cover all transfers of the PIP biological materials to recipient for their duration. So it's very clear, any transfer outside the GISRIS is through the SMTA 1, and within GISRIS, it is through the SMTA, right? 1. Here, it's only a notice. It is not explicitly provide or state that there would be a legally binding agreement. So that's why it's kind of a PIP minus approach. Next slide, please. The next concern is the scope of benefit sharing. So my colleague is going to explain it in detail, but for the moment, let me just explain this. The guaranteed access to vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics is guaranteed under the agreement, pandemic agreement, as well as in the proposed text is only for pandemic, not for PHEIC, though there is a language which suggests that when you develop the PABS system, should include the sharing of benefit, even PHEIC. So what is its consequences? If the sharing of benefit happens, what is the proposed sharing? It is 10% of the real-time production at free of cost by all PTD manufacturers. And if another 10% that can vary based on the size and scale of operation, that will be made available at an affordable price to WHO. So what is guaranteed is only 10%, right, at a free of cost as a donation. So this is the benefit sharing, but that will take place only if there is a pandemic outbreak. How about a public health emergency of international concern? As I explained earlier also, the public health rationale informs you to have an early intervention and contain that outbreak, even to becoming a becoming a PHEIC or a pandemic. But here the logic is that we will give only when it becomes a pandemic, not before that. So this is a highly problematic approach, and this is kind of will legitimize the colonial extraction of the data, because the data you have to share is throughout 24/7. Whenever you identify, something called PABS material and sequence information you'll have to share. The biological material, what is your obligation? It's very clear. The PABS material and sequence information that are detected shall be shared in a rapid and timely manner. So what is a PABS material? PABS material includes the pathogens with pandemic potential. So what is a pathogen with a pandemic potential? That means basically means any non-pathogen that determined to have cause a public health emergency of international concern. So it is not a pathogen of pandemic that creates pandemic or the potential to create a pandemic. Even a PHEIC you are supposed to share. But what you get is the benefit sharing is only when, in terms of the concrete benefit sharing, in terms of access to these products, only when there is a pandemic. Next slide, please. That's you are basically asked to sign a blank check at this moment, because the language says that the conference of the parties shall, at its first session, agree on the model terms and conditions of the aforementioned WHO PABS contracts and the notice, as well as the relevant modalities with respect to annual monetary contribution. So the substantial part of the PABS system will be decided by the COP. How does COP come into existence? Only after the ratification of the pandemic agreement. So that basically means you are shifting the goalposts. Earlier, it was told the PAP system will be part of the pandemic agreement. Everything will be approved by the World Health Assembly together. Now, the pandemic agreement has been adopted. Now, the PAP system is under negotiation, but even the key element of the PAP system will be now adopted later by COP. So that means basically countries are asked to sign something which they don't know what is there in the content or what are going to be the content. So this is a highly problematic approach. Next slide, please. So no regulation of database. As we all know that there is a clear shift in the technology. You don't need these pathogen physical samples. Of course, you need a few more years, but not for all types of products. Even we all know that the COVID vaccines are developed based on the DSI. So the DSI, digital sequence information will be placed in various databases. So there is no plan to establish a WHO governed database or WHO owned database, but it will be other databases that will be recognized WHO as an authorized database or databases based on certain, if they agree for certain conditions. But there also, you look at the database, certain conditions have been placed, around 4 conditions. So one of the conditions is that inform users, the database should inform users of its database of the WHO pandemic agreement and the PAP system, including notification of possible legally binding benefits. So there is no clarity whether the users have to enter into a benefit sharing arrangement through a click wrap agreement while accessing the data. So there is no clarity here. And who is going to draft the agreement? How there are certain conditions are mentioned, but the database has to enter into an agreement with WHO to be recognized by WHO. That will be developed by the WHO Secretariat. That's next slide, please. Yeah, that's, and I already mentioned all these PAPS related contracts are supposed to be developed by the Secretariat, and it will be placed at the COP, and then there will be under pressure to, accept it or reject it. So countries will be under pressure to, by and large, to accept it. So here there is no role for the member states to in the finalization of these agreements. And it's not also very clear that all these agreements will be placed before the COP, though it is mentioned earlier, which I showed you. It said that the COP has to approve. So there is no role in the development. So these are very important concerns, and there are many other concerns. If you go through the text, I would say that there are major gaps. What is proposed is not a comprehensive system to ensure predictable, accountable, and transparency-based PABS system. So for that, there are huge gaps, to be filled. But these are the 4 or 5 important concerns we flagged here. And next slide, please. And that's my last slide. And it's very clear. There are huge gaps, and therefore, we should avoid this approach. Civil society organizations that we need a PABS at any cost. We need to look into the content. Okay, so we should not have an approach that we need at any cost. So a content, if we can, and that system can serve its purpose or fit for the purpose, then only we need to support that agreement. Otherwise, we should demand for justice and a system which is transparent and accountable. Thank you.
Thank you, Gopal. So I'll give the floor to Nifin, unless there are any pressing comments or questions. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Rania, and thanks everyone for joining. Thanks, Koba, for a detailed presentation. What I would do at this stage is, because it is already, a detailed presentation, I'll perhaps do a very short presentation on, specifically on how we are kind of realizing benefit sharing, kind of reiterating some of the issues, so some of the concerns which Gopa was telling, but a little bit more of stress on this point. And then we spend more time discussing the questions and answers and comments. I'm also standing ready to discuss issues relating to the access side of the PABS. But at this stage, we think it's very important to talk about realizing benefit sharing, which is kind of moving away from the focus of the negotiations. So very short presentation, around 5 to 6 slides. So this is the text on benefit sharing. I'm just showing this. I'm not going to read out every part of the text, but I've just marked some text which seems to me a little bit problematic, especially the first paragraph of the section C, which talks about all participants receive notice of possible legally binding benefit sharing commitments. So it's not very clear. I mean, it's okay. Somebody sends a notice is fine, but there is no proper understanding of what happens before and after notice. Whether somebody is accessing the genetic resources or PAPS resources before the notice, or whether someone is expressing its interest to receive this, access to resources, and then they get the notice. So what happens after they get the notice? Whether do they undertake these commitments before they get the access, or they then get the access and then later they think of taking up these commitments? So this model is really problematic. So that is one approach. And on another hand, I mean, we should a little bit kind of if you look at this particular paragraph and some other paragraphs of the session, they are talking about all participants, which is encouraging than just focusing on manufacturers of the VTDs. Then we move on to the second paragraph, which is focused on manufacturers of VTDs. This is where it's slightly confusing and interesting. It's saying that to be recognized as a participating manufacturer, manufacturers of VTDs must conclude a PAPS contract. It's not saying that to access PAPS resources, manufacturers of VTD has to sign a PAPS contract. So that becomes a challenge in the way which was discussed by Gopa. And then there is also a discussion about the duration of the contract. Now, it's fine you have a duration of the contract, but in many ABS systems, because you are sharing valuable public resources with some entities, and they are utilizing and developing products and other benefits out of it. Sometimes the requirement, not sometimes, most of the times, the requirement to share benefits perhaps would outlive the duration of the contract. So even if you have a withdrawal clause or a termination clause, there will be conditions attached to it that if you have VTDs effective to a pandemic emergency, you need to share this further, even though your contract has been suspended or ended. So that kind of a language is not currently discussed, but it depends on what terms and conditions are developed for the contract. Now, the VTD as manufacturers is actually, as per the paragraph 2, taking up three obligations. First one is to use the PABS materials and sequence information for public health purposes. Second one is reproduction of Article 12.6, in a way saying that you would share VTDs, which is mentioned in Article 12.6 during a pandemic emergency. And then there is Clause C, which talks about annual monetary contributions. There are some concerns here, especially public health purposes is not limited to pandemic emergency. It can go beyond pandemic emergency. So if that's the case, then why the benefits are limited to pandemic emergency, right? That's an important question we need to ask. Similarly, annual monetary contributions are mentioned, but very limited mention about how this contribution will be calculated, what would be the methodology, etc. If we move to the paragraph 3, as of now, what Bureau has done is taken a safe approach, not antagonizing developed countries who were telling the paragraph 7 and 8 of Article 12 is optional in nature. It's not mandatory in nature, whereas South was arguing it is mandatory in nature. That is essentially benefit sharing during public health emergency of international concern, not amounting to pandemic emergency, and as well as benefit sharing, for example, to prevent outbreaks to become a public health emergency. These, according to the global north, is optional in nature. It's not mandatory in nature. And according to South, it is really, really important, really, really mandatory. So what Bureau has done is saying that shall require manufacturer to sign these things, but including options for, and we don't know how this would be further interpreted. And it looks like generally, I would argue, what is already agreed upon in Article 12, 6, 7, 8, that has been compiled, rather than operationalizing it, rather than telling, how do you deliver it, when do you deliver it? Like, for example, South Africa's proposal had a very specific timelines by the time, when you will share your VTDs, etc. Those kind of operational details are missing in paragraph 2 and 3. Paragraph 4 is the most another paragraph which talks about that the conference of parties shall, in the first session, agree on the model terms and conditions for the PABS contracts and the notice. This is the same approach which INB was taking for the last 2 years, right? Like pushing down things further down for the South, right? Like, so we have been arguing that we want an operation ready PABS at the time of entry of force into pandemic agreement. And what is being said here is you would discuss WHO PABS contract and the model terms and conditions in the first COP. So very, very limited incentives will be there for the North once the pandemic agreement enters into force. Once Article 4, Article 5, etc. starts applying, they will have very limited incentives, and they will not actually agree on many of the demands or many of the important requirements which South will have in developing these terms and conditions. That is a big challenge. So I would say if we go like this, we would not have a PABS contract or model terms for PABS contract for several COPs after the entry into force of the pandemic agreement. Here again, model terms and contracts is a problematic term because it's not standardizing the terms and conditions in the contract, right? We need a standard contract to fasten access, also to reduce the kind of what we call as compromises Secretariat will have to make. For example, if Secretariat enters into a negotiation with Pfizer and it's fully available, it's fully open to Secretariat to agree any kind of terms and conditions, then whenever the company says no, Secretariat can have to just look for another option or another compromising option or another diluted language to get them on board. Whereas this would make it like, what you call keep running down or slippery slope. Whereas if member states and conference of parties, or or the IGWIG itself sets a benchmark, sets a standard terms and conditions, at least to a certain extent, you will safeguard that ability and the bargaining capacity of the secretariat. So that's very important, that we should not go by model terms and conditions. We should have certain standardized terms and conditions and with clear benchmarks out there. Last article is talking about commitments by participating manufacturers will be publicly available. But our viewpoint is that this transparency should not be limited to participating manufacturer. It's also limited to other participants. As paragraph 1 is saying, there are several other participants who might be working with PABS system. They should also have what you call as that transparency, so that things will fall in place. So given this is the way language has developed in terms of benefit sharing, what are the few major concerns? So as I said, the first major concern is language is appearing as a compilation of benefits, which is already there in paragraph 6 to 8. There is no operational details and no clarity, what is between mandatory benefits and what will be, considered as additional or optional, etc. Access to VTDs to prevent PHEIC is still listed as an additional item in the list of options. Licensing, we heard from the experts who came October first week or second week to IGWIG. Almost everyone, even without any exceptions, said that diversification of the production is the key preparedness, and PABS system has to actually provide for licensing in terms of diversification of production. So, what we are seeing here is not learning from that input coming from the, resource persons. The second concern, it's very clear. It's not very clear when manufacturer will sign the PABS contract. For example, if you look at section A of section 2, part A, there is a sentence which says manufacturer seeking access would sign. But the other provision which I showed you in the first slide says manufacturers wanting to be recognized as a participating manufacturer would sign. So we don't know at what point the manufacturer would be asked to sign. You also have a provision talks about notice as well, right? So a clarity is required there. To be successful in a PABS system, we should ensure that benefit sharing is really embedded as an access condition. Currently, you have access condition, access in a separate section and benefit sharing in a separate section. So that is already a dealing, right? It's actually better to embed benefit sharing as an access condition, so that it falls in place very clearly. Also, another big concern is that developers are not included in the definition of manufacturers. It deviates from the already known definition of manufacturers from PIP framework. And why this is important? This is important because developers are the early ones who access directly materials and data from the PABS system, and most of them really retain several rights, intellectual property rights or other rights on the products, etc. They could also be more inclined to share licenses for diversification of production rather than a big pharmaceutical manufacturer company who gets it in the end. So it's very important to include developers in the definition of PABS manufacturer. And the third concern, which I just previously said, is that there is no standard PABS contract, and this will compromise the ability of WHO Secretary to negotiate. And the third one is basically, it's also saying that these model terms and contracts will be developed by COP. So we know that it will take a long time. So these are all one or the other way compromising benefit sharing very directly. And then it comes the major concern regarding governance. Especially there is a lack of traceability mechanism, which makes actually PIP framework one of the successful mechanisms because it has a traceability mechanism, whereas here we don't have a traceability mechanism mentioned. Labs and databases are not made accountable to the conference of parties.
Could you just explain what is a traceability?
Thank you. So when we talk about traceability mechanism, at least in the context of PIP framework, it is basically tracking of the shipments of the materials of the biological materials from one entity to another entity or from laboratory to another laboratory. So you know where the materials have gone and who is working on these materials. So there is a kind of public scrutiny. There is a way in which you understand who is working on what. And when you don't have this, the example is plant treaty from FAO. You don't have any mechanism to know who is using the resources provided by plant treaty. And literally, there is, uh, kind of, I would say zero. Of course, of late, one or two people have come forward to share benefits. But whereas when you look at PIP framework, every year for the last several years, pharmaceutical manufacturers were contributing what you call as partnership contributions, and money was being used for several benefit purposes for building support systems in developing countries. So I would argue that's the success of having a proper monitoring mechanism. Nagoya Protocol very clearly says, monitoring of utilization of genetic resources is one of a key element in ABS regime. If we do not have that monitoring of utilization, we would actually lack. It would reflect in the way benefits are shared. It will be like completely undermined. So here, this is problematic because there is no such mechanism proposed for shipment of materials. In fact, Article 12 member states have actually asked for traceability not only for materials but also for data, and which would come only if you have at least basically few things such as user registration, data access agreements, accountable databases, and then what we call as recording of log and user logs, etc. But what is happening? None of these things, none of these measures are appearing in the Bureau's draft text, which would mean the implementation or the benefit sharing side will also take a hit. It will definitely be compromised. And as I said, we don't know what does it mean by possible legal benefit sharing commitment and notice to it. Many other participants may not sign contracts. For example, if we take big, for example, AI firms who actually use a lot of sequence data, bioinformatic data, and produce algorithms as well as bioinformatic tools for pharmaceutical companies, etc., who make a lot of money. And if they actually contribute those 1% or a limited percent of their profits, which could actually be used for strengthening some of the health systems in developing countries as well as low and least developed countries. So it is important to have not only manufacturers of VTDs but also other users of materials and data sign contracts and take up these obligations. There is also a reference to WHO terms of reference for labs and databases mentioned in the PABS Bureau text. Actually, in that way, Bureau text have taken a step forward, as saying that laboratories databases have to comply with some of these terms of reference and certain terms and conditions. But the concern is that these terms of reference is again left to WHO Secretariat to develop, and there is no requirement for approval from Conference of Parties. And also there is this discussion regarding terms and conditions which the labs and databases would follow. Is not sufficient at this stage. At this stage, they do not even deal with the basic issue of whom they would be sharing data and material. Right, the forward sharing is a key element. Right, when you give a material to a laboratory, the key element is key condition to the laboratory is that how would you do the onward sharing? If you're giving it to a manufacturer, if you're giving to a university, or if you're giving to a researcher, when will you give it? What is that condition you will follow when you share it further to a third party? That provision is actually not mentioned in the Bureau's text. So these are concerns relating to traceability. And all the governance of the PABS system is proposed to be in collaboration with stakeholders. And we know ABS is the instrument which has a lot of conflict of interest. So administration to be collaborating with stakeholders having conflict of interest will be a real headache for Secretariat. So we should be at least ensuring that this collaboration with stakeholders, etc., is not encroaching into the governance issues, right? It might be a different matter when how do you organize yourself on an everyday basis, but you cannot extrapolate it to governance and administration. That would also create a lot of compromise in terms of how VTDs are delivered and acquired, etc., stored where. And another thing is that non-compliance is handled by the DG in consultation with PABS advisory group, and there is very limited role for member states. So the conference of parties role in terms of handling non-compliances is also challenged. So I stop here because what I wanted to say is essentially that benefit sharing is limited to pandemic emergencies. There is no clarity on what other benefits would come out of the PAP system. And there is also not clarity that the benefit sharing is embedded as an access condition. And it's also postponing the discussions relating to how PAPS contracts will be developed and what type of PAPS contract will be used. And finally, the governance side and the tracking side is very weak, which would undermine actual delivery of benefits if they are committed at all, which we are not sure whether they will be committed at this stage because the way the structure is developed, there is no clarity on that. When would this benefit sharing commitment will be undertaken by the people who access resources? Thank you.
Thank you, Nipin. Thank you so much for your presentation. We already have a question from James on the chat. He's saying that the PIP framework is for a seasoned vaccine and a market and product technology that are fairly well known and predictable. Does that justify more flexibility in contracts?
So, Gopa, if you want to address, you can answer. My view on this is that flexibility in contracts is, it should be limited. If you keep making every provision of the contract flexible, then the negotiations will continue, even with the level of standardization which PIP framework has. If you look at the SMTA 2 of PIP framework, several clauses is standardized and several clauses is left to negotiation. Even with that limited left to negotiations, they take several years, like 1 or 2 years to conclude a contract. So the lesson learned from PIP framework is to standardize or make the terms more and more standardized and go forward with it. If, as you were suggesting, there are certain other issues which needs to be taken into account. Of course, some of the provisions can be left open. Even that will definitely take further time, but the advice would be, or the logical approach would be to limit the number of clauses which which needs flexibility. Gopa?
I'm saying we also keep in mind that flexibility, within the framework also, certain flexibilities can be given. Nobody say that there should be flexibility, but the most important thing is that certain key provisions that are non-negotiable should be there, especially on access to products. So that part is missing, and it should be, they should enter into at least the obligations on access at the time of accessing the, providing these VTDs at the time of accessing the genetic resources. And we should also keep in mind that most of these vaccines for pandemic will be developed through the public funding. It is not through their own investment like any other pharmaceutical products which have large market. These products will be developed through public funding. So nothing prevents them from creating a system which is based on trust and cooperation through legally binding contracts. In a way, to create a system, all people contribute to the development of vaccines and therapeutics and diagnostics for in the context of pandemic, and also benefit from that, in a way to advance the concept of global public good. Not all pharmaceutical products we are talking about it, right? We are talking about a very small section of the pharmaceutical products, which are pandemic or PHAC related products. This can create, this can, in a break of pandemic or a PHAC can disrupt the whole even economy. So it's important to respond at the earliest. So to facilitate that, it's in the larger interest. So therefore, these things to be kept in mind when we look at the market mechanisms. Thanks.
Thanks, Koppa. I see a text from Peter. Would Peter would like to explain it? I mean, do you want to? Can you allow him to speak?
Yes, just a second. Hi, Peter.
Sorry,
Could you? Yeah, great.
I'm in an airport. I'm not sure if you'll be able to hear me.
Yeah, we hear you, but slightly your voice slightly distant.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, Ebola mpox. I think we need to flesh out these examples more. Mpox specifically is a very interesting one, but so much is now outside the scope. Like if we look, for instance, so much of the work that's happening, like RSV vaccine tested in South Africa, not available in South Africa. There's extreme challenges at the moment with rotavirus data sharing because there is no infrastructure for it. There are no funded rotavirus databases, but these things fall outside the scope because these are not pandemic. These are not considered pandemic, you know. I think maybe just to clarify that, in terms of things with pandemic potential, is that from the WHO list of priority pathogens, or how is that exactly defined?
Thank you, Peter.
I think it's a very important thing. I looked at the questions, especially on many other products are there, like some of these infectious diseases, the products are not available. I think my colleague, Chitali Rao is here. She looked at RSV actually. So Chitali, if you can sort of intervene, it would be good.
Chitali, you're can you unmute?
Sorry, just fighting with the web interface.
I think, it's very important thing. So most of the RSV deaths are happening, in the global south, especially in Africa and other countries. And the medicines, if you look at the market data, it's all sold in the US and a few other northern countries. So there is huge disparity existing. So I think we need to bring all other examples actually. So I just put it these two recent cases in the context of PGAC and pandemic. That is why we put those examples. Yeah, of course, all other, there is a huge disparity, whatever you have listed there on.
But Gopa, just follow on the RSV and the mpox. I think this also points to something that so if we look at the most recent RSV data in public databases from the Global South, from South Africa specifically, it is uploaded by AstraZeneca because they were collecting this as part of their monoclonal antibody trial in South Africa. Now we look at the mpox example. I think we need to do a close study of the mpox example because we know that the first mpox vaccine trial was done in DRC with the support of US partners. And we have to look, what is it stopping, and what is it making the global south so dependent on the global north in order to generate this data in the first place? So now they can get strong armed by these global north partners because the global north, it's bringing the reagents, it's bringing the techniques, because they've been systematically excluded from the global south. The global south research is continually under threat. And now we find these kind of unfair trades. I think the mpox example, we could do some more briefing documents on that.
Yeah, I fully agree. I also try to chip in. There was an initiative in WHO as part of the World Health Assembly decision to map all the arrangements WHO ended in for in facilitating this data sharing, especially related to pathogens. But the WHO did not come out with that document. End of the day, so there is lot of lack of information, or a what you call a systematic opaqueness has been built in the system, and not giving the information of WHO's involvement in facilitating this asymmetric relationship of using the South to supply data to the northern manufacturers, and not complying with the obligations under the CBD and Nagoya Protocol. So this is a very serious issue, and thanks for bringing it. So it goes beyond, actually, as you are rightly pointed out, this goes beyond pandemic and the PHEIC.
Chitali, would you like to intervene?
I'm sorry, I had to attend a parallel call, but Hania just informed me that we were talking about Mpox, RSV, and rotavirus. So, RSV and rotavirus, I don't think are included in the list of pandemic potential pathogens. So,
No,
they are
no.
obviously.
The question is that how the samples have been shared from the south and not been the products are not being shared at the same time.
Oh,
So
okay. So in that, we were categorically, like Gopa put in the examples of Ebola and all that. So we had actually done also a paper from TWN where we were also looking at how they are patenting the products. For example, the second example that Gopa put. So it was very clear when I was reading and going through the patent data also, that they clearly showed that they took the samples from patients in Bangladesh, India, and they were producing, they patented the parts of the vaccine and production. And then later, when the vaccine would be produced, it would be like the uses from the people from the south. Similarly, in case of first example like Ebola, the samples were from patients from DRC, but then we saw a glaring inequity in uh, I think the sharing of the finished products. For example, we clearly saw that there was an inequity. With Mpox, it is not exactly clear because it's an old vac. It's prepared from an older version, and it's just upgraded. So with Mpox, we are not clear. But if you see the data how it is flowing, you can clearly see that for Nipah virus, for Zika virus, and a lot of them I was seeing, and not even these, we also see the use of humans in a lot of animal vaccines also. So it's like samples are being used, and they're explicitly being also mentioned in the patents that the samples are sourced from patients in Rajabari, Bangladesh. The samples are sourced from patients in Malaysia, Nipah virus, Zika also the same thing from Brazil. There were strains that were being used from Brazil. So it's quite clear that the material is coming from South.
Thanks, Chitali. Before giving James Love the floor, I just wanted to make a reflection as a onlooker, because I'm not necessarily fully involved in the discussions relating to VTD development and other things. But when we look at it from Nagoya Protocol and Convention on Biological Diversity ABS perspective, I think it is very important our countries and our own scientists to have faith in the ABS law and try to implement it rather than bypass it. Because many times what we see, at least I can say about at least some of the departments or some of the governments have been interacting with in this fora, in the CBD and other fora, is that their own scientific community come and try to persuade officials and not to apply ABS laws and other things. So one of the ways to overcome this is actually to apply proper ABS laws and kind of build a narrative and build a kind of faith in mobilize scientific community to use ABS laws rather than bypass it. What I have seen is specific funding comes from the global north for campaigning against ABS laws in global south. and most of the times these funds are utilized through scientific networks. So it's a real challenge for our regulatory authorities, as well as sometimes our own communities get scientific researchers get affected by the kind of arrangements some of these networks are developing. So it might be useful to think how creatively Global South Scientist Coalition can come forward and push forward for a better implementation of ABS laws. James Love, may I request you to talk a bit about your questions and comments regarding licensing and mandatory arbitration?
Yes, certainly. I mean, I thank you. It's a really helpful and clear, really useful presentation. I hope I can get the slides so I can study them a bit more. At first I was just drawing a distinction between the PIPS framework, which is, I think, special in the sense that every year you have these updated vaccines, you kind of know who the manufacturers are, you kind of know what the technology is. And then if you look at like what happened in COVID or what happened in monkeypox or what happened in Zika or other things like that, you really have kind of it's all new. And so the players are also pretty diverse. And whatever technologies may come into play or platforms may be kind of different, and the IP landscape can be kind of complicated in some cases. So that's why I asked this question about the flexibility in the obligations. Now, I think that's really an important point about the fact that the time it takes to negotiate custom contracts really slows things, can often really slow things down. It's one of the big problems in compulsory license cases is that the companies that don't want the compulsory license try and drag it out forever, on trying to, sort of make an issue of every single point that can be negotiated. So I think a standard contract's really helpful, and I think it improves transparency, it improves the bargaining power of the public sector in these negotiations. That said, we're kind of curious as to how you can build some reasonable flexibility. And one of the things I've been recently looking a bit at some of these arbitration or license of right type regimes. And I'm wondering, what would it be like if there was, you either signed a standardized contract, or if you don't like that, you agree to binding arbitration, that would sort of like, so you could move ahead and work, but someone else, it would be mandatory that you'd abide by the terms, whatever they were.
Thanks for that comment. Goppa, would you like to respond?
Please go ahead. So I would say that the arbitration clauses will be there part of the final contract, right? So, but we do not know what is the contract right now. It's important to have it because if in case of a violation, there should be a mechanism to redress. So as of now, what is proposed in the element is, just ask the DG and DG will do the needful. That's not enough, I would say.
I think, yeah, anybody else wants to make any further response, further comments? We can unmute you. We have written comments from Peter. That Mpox vaccine trial in DRC mentioned sponsored by US CDC. The colleagues in DRC have historically relied on funding from the US for even basic operations, making it difficult for them to freely negotiate equitable terms in the use of samples and genetic data. Yes. Thanks, Peter. And this is one of the reasons why we think, a PABS system at the multilateral level, at the WHO level, can create a little bit more leverage into developing countries and bring orderliness and discipline into this. And that's why developing countries, group of equity, etc., were actually asking for something called as coordinated laboratory networks and coordinated database networks, WHO database in itself. Because the thing is, it's not trying to stop, it's not trying to create a lot of hurdles or administration into the research process. What is being trying to do is to actually bring what you call as a more streamlined approach towards sharing of genetic resources and data, bring some discipline into it and bring some state oversight into it, multilateral oversight into it. For example, one of the things which we were looking at is if the reliance is always on external databases, um, when would, how would we ensure access to all researchers without discrimination? Because once that external databases takes a decision to change its policy or shut its access. So we have seen recently, uh, at least in the case of plant genetic resources, databases who were freely sharing sequences started suddenly to change their policy to become paid databases. So all these things can happen if we keep relying on external databases, which has no responsibility towards member states or accountability towards conference of parties and member states. So that's why we think it's important. And thanks for making this view. It's very true. That's why we are here trying to build a multilateral system. And with regard to also talking about other sequences which are not pandemic potential, fake potential, most important thing is that if you are accessing now, already the Bureau's text says sequences or pathogens which can cause any PHEIC has to be part of the definition of pandemic potential. It's not limited to those pathogens which can actually create pandemic potential, I mean, pandemic emergency kind of thing. So then the question is, why is it when it comes to benefit sharing, we are only talking about pandemic emergency? If you're covering PHEIC, then why don't the benefit sharing also cover PHEIC, right? So this is a very important issue, and we hope we can move forward some of these things. Yes. Can we, if there are any other comments, or we can stop?
Peter has made a follow-up comment about GSAID. I don't know if you
We have seen GSAID recently cut off bulk access for some key users because they wanted to be the one-stop shop for analysis of the data they hold. Yeah, GSAID does all these things here and there, but at the same time, I mean, I'm not advocating for GSAID, but I really want to say GSAID actually shows a model of having user registration, data access agreements, etc., which is respectful of the data submitters' rights, and so at least if we try to develop a similar model which respectful of data submitters, not only data submitters' rights, but also country of origin as well as public right to access to medicines, etc., it would be really, really useful. And we can stop relying on GSAID in that sense. But what is happening is that Global North is putting a lot of pressure to not to build a database with some of these characteristics, and that would mean people again go back and relying on GSAID or similar databases. So that's a challenge. It's not about GSAID alone. The counterpart is INSDC, which is sponsored by Europe, America, and the Japan. And we have seen that database is also under threat, right? At many times when if a policy of US changes, its funding actually changes, and its structure gets changes, its facilities gets changes. And this database has been historically involved in, I would say, frustrating national ABS laws by not mandating country of origin metadata in the sequence. So knowingly or unknowingly aiding digital biopiracy. So there are issues associated with external databases if can only be addressed if we bring them together um, uh, into an understanding, into a common understanding under WHO. Thanks.
Thanks, Nifin. We also have another question from from James. I would add just one thing also, I think it would be interesting for people who might not be following so closely the negotiations, which is at the level of the negotiations happening at the IGWIG. If you could summarize a bit what has happened, and the proposals that are on the table, and what is what are the next steps as well, since we've
Oh, I
dove
see.
in a complicated question, right? I'm sorry. But
Okay,
yeah.
so I think we are ending the time, so we will take these three things. One is the comment from James Love, and the other's comment from Peter, and your question. So with regard to the question from James Love, whether we are familiar with European data spaces regulation, health data spaces regulation, as of now, not yet. I have not looked into it. But at the same time, Europe has another regulation which facilitates free flow of non-personal data, which includes, I would argue, the genetic sequences from pathogens or plants or animals. And this law has a very strong provision regarding ensuring data availability to competent legal authorities. It even provides strong data governance mechanisms like data audits to competent legal authorities across borders. So European law has some such kind of very strong law on data regulation, even when they promote free flow of data facilitated. But when it comes to having very basic minimal uh, data governance instruments such as user registration or data access agreement in PABS negotiation, I don't know, Europe keeps opposing all these proposals. The Africa CDC Agari is a new proposal. It's a kind of new database discussion happening around. We haven't yet seen what types of protocols it is building, whether it is building a proper user identification and registration requirements, whether it is building a proper data access agreement. I heard it actually trying to work to build something called as federated access between countries in Africa, like the data sovereignty of countries are not challenged, etc. But we need to know who is funding this database and where its storages are located and what sort of policies it's developing. And if it's a good one, yeah, of course, we should support backing some of these initiatives. With regard to your question, Rania, it's a big question. What are the various proposals and what are the current debates? If I need to summarize it, I think the proposals from Group of Equity and some countries like South Africa, Indonesia, Malaysia, Brazil, etc., is very clear about having a system which is accountable, which means you're sharing pathogens and sequences through databases and laboratories, which would be accountable to the conference of parties. And these entities like laboratories and databases will ensure that sharing of materials and information to researchers and manufacturers across the world uh, without discrimination in a fair manner, and ask them to undertake an obligation to share applicable benefits. Like, I mean, if it's a manufacturer of VTD, you need to share manufacturers of VTD, or the if it is something else, then they have to provide that on the basis of what products and what benefits they develop. And they have also very clear that there needs to be benefit sharing not only in pandemic emergency, but also to prevent PHEC happening, and also to during the PHEICs, also there needs to be access to VTDs, etc. Whereas if we look at the counter proposal from Europe, it's basically kind of trying to say access and benefit sharing is not connected, kind of going against what Nagoya Protocol explicitly acknowledges, that interlinkage between access and benefit sharing, and basically asking countries to encourage pharmaceutical companies to enter independent contracts with WHO to share VTDs. And that too only limited to pandemic emergency. This is the proposal coming from North and Europe, and it is not at all. And whatever is talked about access is basically everyone has access. So even if, like, for example, let's take between 10 pharmaceutical companies, 5 of them signs agreement with the WHO and 5 of them does not sign agreement with the WHO. It doesn't matter. All 10 of them get access. So there is no incentive for that company or any company to specifically come and sign it unless except for what you call as reputational thing or goodwill, etc. Kind of converting the entire mechanism of ABS into a corporate charity. This is the proposal coming from the Europe, and there has been significant opposition from Europe when it comes to building basic discipline in the way samples, materials, biological materials, and data is handled. They just want it to be as it is currently. Especially they have one of the funders of this biggest database collaboration called as INSDC, which is very much instrumental in extracting data from global south to global north in an inequitable manner. So to back it, to fund it, and in fact, in another way, this particular database which Peter was referring to, GSAID, is also kind of backed up by countries like Germany, etc. But it's managed by a private entity. So they're basically saying either, if it's either something which is privately managed or something funded. I mean, the word is devil and the deep blue sea, right? If you're saying either you go to GSAID or you come to INS, that's how they propose it. But yeah, this is where they are standing. And what Bureau has done is and there was also one more important aspect, a debate between South and North, was that South wanted whoever accessing materials and data has to have some form of terms and conditions relating to the use of this resources and as well as benefit sharing, which North did not want. As you just heard, like Europe was telling, just go and encourage some pharmaceutical companies to enter agreement with WHO. That was the model, right? So this was another debate. So taking into all these debates and proposals together, what Bureau has done is actually try to bring all the various elements in the text, but it is not solving, it is not creating an operation ready PABS. It will not deliver. If as such, if you say just adopt the Bureau's text as it is not going to deliver benefits, right? So you definitely need to improvise the text which Bureau has proposed. And I think the next week, member states would be trying to do it from both sides to bring back some of their elements and some of their models and try to improvise the proposals from the Bureau. Goppa, you want to conclude? I can put the link for Peter's question.
No. Just nothing to add further.
Then, Rania, please, when you make a comment, I'll get the link for Peter.
Of course. Thank you, Nifin. So we have 3 minutes actually 2 minutes until the end. I would like to open the floor for any final comments or questions. This is the time. Thank you so much for coming and for your engagement and interest. I saw that Nifin has shared here in the chat also the last 2 info services that report on the sessions of the IGWIG, and on the European Union's proposal. He also just shared where the text submitted by the countries, by member states are hosted. And we are, of course, open to any contact from you, and we will share the recording very briefly with everyone. So thank you so much. I think there isn't any, I at least don't see any hands or comments. Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll see each other soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Take care.
Bye.